Wheel of Genre, the show for people who are doing everything they can to escape from humanity. We're starting a series where we are reading every story in Harlan Ellison's anthology, Dangerous Visions. We're going story by story, reading, seeing what connections we can make, and right now we're starting with Evensong by Lester del Rey. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in how Lester del Rey has developed as a writer since the first time we saw him in Helen O'Loy.
Wow, what an interesting story, old Helen Ellison. I'm Bob. I'm interested in what kind of, not to spoil this, but what kind of God is this in this story, and what kind of humans has it created? You know, what is the dynamic here? Zach, I am super excited to start this with you. It's such a weird collection, and I'm really interested in the history behind the collection. Dangerous Visions is published in 1967. It's 33 stories, and none of them were published before. It's Harlan Ellison, the kind of, nut of science fiction. I guess there's a lot of nuts in science, but the kind of gung-ho, super excitable, really exciting writer who got lots of people to participate and got lots of people motivated to write, but then also to create this anthology. And I think it's such an interesting anthology, this idea of dangerous visions. I think at this point, these science fiction writers feel maligned, or they feel like they are not being taken seriously. And Harlan Ellison wants to create something where people give more of their own personal voice, and maybe some things that are a little bit troubling, I guess, or that are being censored or left out of different publications put in astounding science fiction at the time.
Bob, we know Harlan Ellison as kind of the mentor for Dan Simmons, the author of the Hyperion series, which we read for our podcast not too long ago. But we've also read 2 Harlan Ellison short stories at this point. How would you characterize him as a writer? What kind of personality does he have? And do you feel like we'll see that personality come out in his editorial choices?
Oh, yeah, I bet we will see it in the editorial choices and in the afterwards. It's a really interesting collection because every story, again, is original, sent to Harlan Ellison for this project, and each one comes with an afterword kind of addressing how that author's story relates to this project. Harlan Ellison, I think, is a blast. We read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and also Repent Harlequin, said the TikTok man. And we have these really interesting, almost like they're dystopian, but they're also really short. They're very powerful. They're like little tiny engines, or like little tiny hanging jewels. They're very interesting stories you can never forget. And I feel like we read those years ago, but they are still crystal clear in my mind. And I think that is probably what he's going for. In this Lester del Rey story, how many pages, Zach? 6 pages? 5 pages?
It's not very long.
It's short, but it is punchy. It's got a big impact, I feel like. It's saying a lot, and it is so concise, so straightforward. Well, I'll see what you think. Do you like this style?
Well, we've read Lester del Rey before. So we read Helen O'Loy, which was the story of 2 men who are, I guess you could say, like inventors. They feel more like mechanics at sometimes, and they kind of bricolage together a robot wife. And this is a story that raised a few eyebrows at the time and well afterwards. They basically stopped seeing women because he loves Helen O'Loy. The name is a play on Helen of Troy, but kind of a mixture of like Helen alloy, like a metallic alloy. Either way, the idea is that they made the perfect woman out of a machine. It's an idea that I think we can see echoed through something like films like Ex Machina, for example, but a much more dystopian or horror-tinged vision of that idea. So this is where we've seen Lester del Rey before, but that was a story that was set on Earth and is really looking at humanity's relationship with the machine, as well as, men's relationship with women. This story, on the other hand, is out of the solar system. It's a completely different vision. And I think this actually speaks really well about the range of Lester del Rey's mind. He's not just pegged down to like repeating the same ideas again or developing the same world.
Yes, that's a very good point. I didn't really think about that. I feel Harlan Ellison's style was consistent in what we've read so far. However, I would not think that these are the same, done by the same author. Helen Ellison and Evensong feel completely different. There's no similarity to me at all in theme, in the style, in, I guess, the voice just feels like a different person altogether. Let's talk about this story. What is happening and what makes it so different from other Lester del Rey stories?
Well, to give a broad level overview of the plot, what we get is a narrative about a person landing on a planet, and he's on the run. It sounds like he's been confined to a certain part of the galaxy and has tried to make a daring escape from his, would you call them captors? Would you call them wardens?
Usurpers.
The people who he calls the usurpers. And what I find so fascinating about this story is that he doesn't give us everything at once. We're confined to the short story form, so we know that we have to do a lot. We have to enter the speculative world as quickly as possible. And I think the way that other short story writers would do this would be by front-loading as much information as possible. But not Lester del Rey. What he does is he just gives us paintbrush strokes, details here and there, details about where he's landed, and why he's there. So he stops at a planet to recharge, and it's the tiny details that you really have to pay attention to. He stops at a planet with a yellow sun. I think anyone who has had enough experience with short stories knows that if they're not getting enough information up front, but we're just hinting at relationships, we're hinting at setting, a certain kind of twist is going to happen eventually. And that's really exactly what he gets. This person lands on the planet, realizes that the animals there are animals that he's seen before. It's the same planet where he originally met the usurpers. And as the story goes on, we learn that our protagonist, at one point in the distant past, actually taught these usurpers, gave them technology, allowed them to reach to the stars, until one day they became more powerful than this character. And here's the twist. That character who we hear this story from is God. So this is a tale about a time in the future when humanity has become so powerful, has spread so far throughout the stars, has, I guess you could say, mastered the laws of physics that govern the universe to the point where they have overpowered God. It's a completely different vision from Lester del Rey. It's not speculative fiction as much as I would say it's like a speculative theology. It's reimagining a kind of religious vision if humanity takes technology to, I guess you could say, like the logical outcome.
Yes, it's no longer Bill and Ted or weird science. The whole God thing it's very interesting. Yes, we're hinted that it's a yellow sun, so maybe it has to do with our planet. The planet, however, is only called the meeting world, so we don't know exactly where. And this God has had dealings with the ancestors of the usurpers, maybe even created those ancestors, then gets involved and starts helping these people, like you said, giving them the technology to go beyond the stars. But then he's taken down. They come and they say, we're going to bring you out of here because you're in a sacred place and you don't belong here. They're telling that to God. They say, we're going to take you out of this sacred place. And this character is feeling sad, feeling terrible. It says the bitterness of this forced these words from him. He says, but why? I am God. And then the usurper starts to look sad, starts to pity him for a second, but then figures out what he wants to say. He says, I know, but I am man. Come. And so that is the end of God. And then there's another little Easter egg at the end where it says, and on the eighth day, this is what happened. So, God created everything. Now the eighth day, man has come and taken it away. But in this idea of Harlan Ellison's collection, comes out in 1967, do you feel like this is an affront? Like, why is this a dangerous idea or a dangerous vision? Is this an affront to Christianity? Would it really offend Christians? What's going on with his claims of God here? Because it is a God that seems to have created something, but he does use a capital G. Man uses a capital M. And then man supplants God. Do you think that would be offensive? Is that why it's in Dangerous Visions?
It's a good question of is it offensive? And, maybe if I was, maybe I'd be in a better place to answer that if I, was more Christian. But if I was to speculate, I would say that I think the issue is that the way that God is personified in the story as like a limited subjective being. It's God inside of a body. He's on the planet and he's listening. He's taking in sensory information. He's looking around. He's learning as he goes. And that's not really like, I guess I would say that's like not a theologically correct idea of God, in the sense of like, I think for most monotheistic people, God is a all-knowing, fully developed, cannot learn, cannot change, omniscient and omnipotent presence. So like, is it that offensive to someone of a monotheistic religion? I think the response would just be, it's an interesting thought experiment, but it does not reflect any kind of like theological reality. That's how I interpret it. But there's someone who's willing to get offended at anything. So
Yes, no, I would agree. I think it's a silly question to me because, if you're a reasonable person, you're not going to get offended at this. It's just you choose to be offended at certain things. But I think it's a really interesting take on, we've seen lots of creation myths, I guess. We saw it in Tolkien, and I wanted to look at a couple things we've seen. One is the story in the Silmarillion where Aule makes the dwarves, and, Ilúvatar comes and says, I'm the only one who can create things. What are you doing? But Aule loves creation and loves humanity. Well, not humanity yet, but loves the idea of Ilúvatar and all of these people creating things. So it's a very devoted kind of mess up, or a devoted little sneaky thing that Aule does. And it seems quite different here, where we have a god who's just kind of coincidentally involved in humanity, and then instead of humanity coming to serve that god, they get closer, and they do actually serve that god for a while, and they do pray to this god for a while, but then they come, and it says, quote, their webs of detection were everywhere, seemingly. Their great power-robbing lines made of a net too fine. Stars and worlds were linked until only a series of miracles had carried him this far. And now the waste of power for such miracles was no longer within his reach, since their near failure in entrapping and sequestering him. They had learned too much. So they learned too much, and it becomes like an obsession for these people because they're tracking him down throughout this story, tracking him down, tracking him down, tracking him down. It's such a negative take on creation, whereas, Aule in Tolkien, it's positive. Even though he's done something against God's will, it is for the sake of God's creation. So it's positive. This is threatening. And Lester del Rey says in his afterword, he says, is there a purpose and design to the universe and to man? It may not matter. If so, must we follow it blindly? If blind chance rules, can we not shape our own purpose suitable to our ultimate possibilities? So it seems he's creating, I don't know, it's trying to not offend anyone, but if it is a thought experiment, God exists, but somehow we've come to go and kill him, and then he wants us to pursue these ultimate possibilities? Like, what do you think his idea of teleology is here? Because that's what he says he's trying to write.
Yeah, it really does make me wonder. I mean, he does say somewhere in there that he wants humanity to become his equals around the time that the yellow sun burns out. But I think it quickly becomes apparent that there's major personality differences between humanity and God. And I have a great quote right here. In his younger days, he had cherished a multitude of worlds where the game of life's ebb and flow could be played to the hilt. It had been a lusty universe to roam then, but the usurpers could brook no rivals to their own outreaching lust. The very peace and order here meant that this world had once been theirs. So you get this kind of like contrasting visions of how to interact with the world, with with God, it kind of portrays him as like a universal playboy. I might be the only one of us two who's read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but Zaphod Beeblebrox, the alien who goes around from planet to planet partying. God is someone who's, his interactions with the universe is described as lusty, and life is a game that he's playing. Whereas with humanity, what we get is an outreaching lust. And it says that they can brook no rivals. So whereas God, it seems to have a very hands-off, live and let live approach, humanity seems to be very intent on, having no usurping their rivals. And not only that, but God knows that this world has been touched by humanity because the very peace and order that he sees gives it away as a kind of product of human activity. And I think that's very interesting that humanity makes world peaceful and orderly, like a Japanese Zen garden, whereas the God's vision of a good world would be something like the Amazon rainforest, if we can contrast those two visions of fauna and flora.
Thinking of Werner Herzog in the jungle. Okay, so if God is lusty and going out and partying and kind of just enjoying creation and expanding creation almost willy-nilly, is humanity then kind of history or the sense of progress? Moving forward, seems they colonize a bunch of places. They put this order on these worlds. They bring about peace, but they also seem to have caused war. So they're kind of causing problems, solving problems, causing problems, but they're always moving towards something. This God, almost like Prometheus coming down and bringing down fire and saying, well, here you go, good luck with whatever you do with it. Here, God seems to not be that invested in, I guess, the ends of what he's teaching. He seems to give us the ability to go out towards the stars, but there's no exactly plan. It's a risk. We don't know what we don't know what the usurpers are going to do with this fire or with this power to go out into the stars.
Yeah, it really seems to have backfired on God. I'm interested in why they want to confine God to the center of the universe. What is the point of that? Why would they do that? Is it just confinement for the sake of confinement? There's this one variable that they can control, but they can't quite control, so they want to keep it in a box. I don't know. I am glad you said the word Prometheus, because if anything, this story really reminded me of the film Prometheus of the Alien franchise, in the sense of like kind of a alternate human origin story that reframes, human religion and human origins as actually being a kind of technological creation by higher beings. But that might be a bit of a reach, but it was definitely something in the back of my mind as I was reading this book.
I would say so. It's this author, Lester del Rey, is considered still inside of the, as Isaac Asimov calls it, the first revolution of science fiction. So after, when there was a divide of just extreme science, like basically scientific papers with a few character names thrown in, versus just adventure stories like Flash Gordon that have nothing to do with science. And that first revolution kind of brought a cohesion towards those, and then started to have these more artistic views of science fiction start to emerge. And now in this second revolution, which Isaac Asimov is saying this book, Dangerous Visions, is kicking off, Lester del Rey is kind of grandfathered in. He's the old guard, but he is able to transition, unlike a lot of other of those previous Golden Age sci-fi authors. So it's interesting that he is trying to look at something that, is in Prometheus, that is in this alien mythos that we're still talking about today. However, he is part of this old society.
So when Asimov is talking about like first revolution and second revolution, of which he's the first and Lester del Rey is part of the first, but Harlan Ellison is the second, are we supposed to understand that as like synonyms for what we would now call like the golden age of science fiction versus the new wave of science fiction in the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, according to this intro by Isaac Asimov, and please correct us in the comments if we're wrong. We're just starting off on this journey. But yes, he defines it, and he even kind of says, this is how I consider the golden age of science fiction. But yes, he also is asked by Harlan Ellison to write a story for this collection, but he writes the introduction, but he says he won't write a story because he is part of that old guard and he doesn't feel like he wants to contribute to this new revolution where it is all these young authors, Harlan Ellison, Roger Zelazny, lots of these authors who are trying to create something new.
It is interesting how Lester del Rey, the first story we read by him is quintessential golden age science fiction. It's about people building a robot on Earth. This to me feels like he was attempting to do the new wave, if that makes sense. He's writing about God. He's giving a kind of like alternate history of the origins of humanity. These are quintessential dangerous visions. And I think that as we read further into this anthology, we'll start to see how, what he's doing aesthetically here will fit in with the other people in this anthology. Or at least that's my anticipation. That's my hypothesis. I think we're going to see stuff that feels thematically related to this as we go on.
I doubt it. I think you have a very good point. However, I suspect it's going to be dirty sexy. I think there's going to be some sexy stories in these science fiction stories that we're going to get into, and they're going to be more directly irreverent. I think this story is irreverent because allegorically it is. These humans are irreverent because they go down and take down God, and they say, look, you are no longer the sacred, you are now just the profane. Get out. And I wonder if Lester del Rey is trying to say, maybe not, but trying to say something here with this transition from one revolution to another, from golden age to a new wave, of this new wave telling Isaac Asimov, Lester del Rey, and the other golden age authors, get out. You're no longer the sacred, you're now the profane. So I think it could be placed at the beginning of these stories to kind of be that, to signal the revolution. They are lighting up this fire. And I think it's a gesture, Prometheus bringing down a torch, bringing down fire. So it's a nod to the old, but then it's also in that irreverency.
I think about how when salmon need to go from the oceans up to the rivers where they breed, there's that, it's the transition from salt water to fresh water. And in that time, they need to go into, the openings of these rivers where it's a mixture of fresh water and salt water and acclimate to the different environment. And to metaphorize what you're saying, maybe as readers, we are, the salmon in this, and we need to be taken from our expectations of the golden age of science fiction. And Lester del Rey is acting as a kind of transition figure in this anthology into which things will get weirder and more interesting and more stylized and maybe sexier. I don't know. It's a good hypothesis, and I think that we got, 33, 35, 38? We have a lot of stories ahead of us to really figure out what's going on with this new wave.
Zach, before we sign off, is Lester del Rey the water or the mating impulse in this metaphor of salmon? Where are you going?
Oh, I thought it was just a beautiful salmon fillet on a barbecue. I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, man. Hey, if you like the show, we have a Patreon where we are doing lots of cool projects. I think like right now we're in the middle of recording episodes on every single Shakespeare play. We've also been doing this for the past 3-4 years in audio-only podcasts, which you can find on Spotify, the Apple, YouTube. If you like it, feel free to hit subscribe, leave a rating, give a thumbs up, whatever you're feeling. And thanks for listening. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.